Well, welcome to Fort George. I'm sure everybody knows Fort George. My name's Stephen Duncan. I look after our visitors across the National Estate that Historic Environment Scotland does, and I'm delighted to assist in the unveiling, particularly that it represents a very lesser known part of our history at Fort George. We all can associate Fort George with the post-Jacobite period, but equally Fort George has gone through various changes in its military time, and from our perspective we look after over 300 monuments across the country, many of which have memorials to many military activities. So I'm delighted to be here today to assist in this, not only just to assist in this, but also to welcome up to hopefully 3,000 visitors who will come to our Amazing Ages event. So hopefully I'll see many of you later in the fort itself. So I'd like to pass over to Kenneth.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all very much for coming, and my name's Kenneth Bannerman. I'm the founder and head of the Airfields of Britain Conservation Trust, which is essentially Britain's and the world's first national airfield charity, and we are without question making a real difference towards the benefit and advancement of everyday society. May I immediately say as well, thank you to everyone at Historic Environment Scotland for allowing us to have this memorial here today. We greatly appreciate all your help in allowing us to do this. If you'll just allow me just this quick personal mention, as a few of you will already be aware that I've had an exceptionally strong family connection with Ardersier. My late mother, who unfortunately died 3 years ago, her family came from Ardersier, and this is going way back in time. For example, they lived in the toll house at the Campbelltown end of the village at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. And I can remember coming here at the end of the 1960s because my late mother's mother, she was buried at the cemetery at Ardersier on Christmas Day 1959. Therefore, with mum especially being so close to her mum, we always made sure that we attended to the grave when we were up here, and there are several family members buried there, as well as now my mum's ashes. Now, why this is all relevant to the airfield is that, again, on a personal note, I can remember saying to my mother way back in the late 1990s that it was such a shame that although Fort George Airfield was not at all well recognised, if even full stop, that it would have been nice to have some kind of commemoration. Now, we have had in the last couple of years the information plaque in the fort itself, but this is all part of our ongoing programme to erect commemorative granite memorials at disused airfields across the UK. We're moving as fast as we can with this. As for the airfield itself, it is a surprisingly interesting, not to mention in-depth history. It all dates back to the summer of 1913, when there was a separate seaplane base erected at Cromarty on the links at the town. And there were some very famous visitors there. Winston Churchill, for example, took at least one flight in a seaplane while at Cromarty. However, by the end of the summer of 1913, the authorities quickly realised that due to the sea conditions and various other limiting factors, they could perhaps do better in terms of a seaplane base. Fort George was an obvious contender because of the army connections, and it would have just fitted in with all military activities. And therefore, during October 1913, the mobile base at Cromarty was relocated by ship to Fort George. So by the end of October, there was at least an advance party here, and by the end of 1913, the base was fully up and running. If you look at the National Archives records in London, you can find certainly two fairly in-depth documents that detail ongoing activities at the seaplane base. from round about the time World War I started until early 1915. They mention all important and more, shall we say, lesser facts. For example, there were even considerations about creating landplane airfields in the area as opposed to the seaplane base. 2 sites were earmarked, one at Ardersier and another one at Cardiff Delnies. But the flying authorities at the time thought that they weren't just properly suitable locations. So seaplane flying carried on here to some degree, involving what were called white seaplanes, an fairly early, well-known early type of seaplane, until the spring of 1915. Now after this, the history of Fort George Airfield gets a bit rather more vague. But with all the research that I've done privately, again not least at the National Archives, if you know where to look, you can find more in-depth information. For example, there's a fairly well-known map dating from April 1916 that says that the airfield was still operational, contrary to what some people suggest otherwise, because the closing date in particular is very much open to debate. Also notably, at the end of 1916, there were further records that detailed, albeit to a lesser degree, that the airfield was still active. But crucially, there's a military file from early 1917 which deliberately does not mention the airfield as being active as part of the Royal Naval Air Service. And there are 2 further fairly well-known military maps from 1918, from May and October of that year, that definitely do not list Fort George. And also, as you'll know yourself, Lorna, you very kindly helped me with the anti-submarine boom documentations. I saw the files because I told you. And just to briefly explain that point, round about the turn of 1918, there was this anti-submarine boom erected between Fort George and Shannonry Point. And as Lorna will tell you, there were all these files that notified the development of wireless transmission stations so they could all coordinate with each other. And there's one absolutely crucial page which notably refers to the former seaplane base at Fort George. And this was at the turn of 1917-1918. Therefore, we can safely say that the airfield, to all intents, closed at the end of 1916. The other thing I should just mention as well, if of interest, as regards to the layout of the base, this has also been a source of some confusion. Until fairly recent times, the general thinking that there was one hangar here. I mean, if you can just see where that scaffolding is, and in the stone building alongside, the seaplane base was slightly behind that. Now, as regards the hangars, and again with Lorna's great help, we now know, and this is photographic evidence, that there were in fact 3 hangars at the base and 2 slipways. Now, it's not completely provable yet, but it may be the case that when you're able to walk round the beach and you see these wooden stumps sticking out of the water, they may well be the remains of the slipways. We don't know, but they could well be. As regards the hangars themselves, the previous thinking was that the one hangar went to an airfield that's been long disused but was in the news just the other day, Smoog Row in Orkney. That was very notable because a very brave pilot called Commander Edwin Dunning took off from there 100 years ago this month, and he was the first person to land on a moving ship. Tragically, he was killed in another landing attempt a few days later. He took off from Smoog Row, and why I mention that place is that between the early summer of 1918 and the early months of 1919, the 3 hangars were removed from Fort George to Smoog Row. So we have solved that mystery as well. Previously it was thought there was just the one hangar, but there were in fact 3. So this place is really important, although it might not be perhaps immediately evident in terms of what's left. But then this is the case with all of our airfields, whether active or disused. they are phenomenally important places to all of us, not just militarily, but just in our everyday social lives. And we simply can't afford to lose these places as regards whether they're active or disused. Therefore, as we say to people, we can only respectfully ask the general public to, within reason, just do everything they possibly can to help honour, protect and save our airfields, and not forgetting, of course, all the very brave personnel who've served here over the years. One person I should mention as regards when the airfield was actually open, as you'll be aware, Ardeshir, to its enormous credit, has played a great part in promoting this. Private Jack Chaplin of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. As it's now been revealed, that Canadian regiment in the early months of World War I helped, among other things, guard the seaplane base. And incidentally, this poor young man who tragically died through illness on New Year's Day 1915, as fate would have it, he's buried more or less beside where my mother and her family are now buried. So the villagers made a really great effort and very commendable in honouring this brave young man. So this is not just about airfields and aircraft. It goes without saying, it's also about people, and we can never forget. And the good news is that since the charity first emerged in 2006, we are definitely making a real difference to the advancement of everyday society through erecting memorials, trying to help save airfields, and just helping people. We've even helped save jobs, which is making a real difference to people's lives. So it's a case of just onwards and upwards with the charity. And but although Fort George Airfield is now over 100 years old, this place is still massively relevant to every single one of us through winning wars, saving lives and helping people. That's what it's all about in life. And people, thankfully, maybe a bit belatedly, but better late than never, are now beginning to realise this, just how important our airfields are. And it goes without saying in the General Murray Firth area that with the economic benefits and tourism, airfield tourism does exist as well, despite what people might think. It's surprisingly popular. These places hugely matter, financially, jobs, socially, you name it. Dr. Gray's, the hospital at Elgin, half the staff there are connected one way or another with Kinloss and Lossiemouth. So these places are phenomenally important to every single one of us. And therefore, well, thank you very much for your time. And I can only, if you just forgive me, I can just say to my mum, she's no doubt looking down from up there, to say, we finally did it, Mum. We finally did it. And so we're now absolutely delighted to unveil what is now ABCT's 63rd memorial. And there, as you'll be aware, there's this further one tomorrow at Eventon, the Island Deephaven Industrial Estate. And with a bit of luck, by the end of this year, we'll have over 100 memorials. So we're going as fast as we can on this. But I'm really delighted. Again, I don't want to belabour the point on a personal level, but this really, I have to say, this really means a lot to me. Just think about myself, my late mum, and all my family. It really, it's like coming home in a way, I have to say. It really is. So, but looking at the bigger picture, we're really thrilled and greatly appreciate to have this memorial to honour yet another of our truly remarkable places in Britain, in this case Fort George Airfield. Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. Family name was McCann.